Scientists in many different parts of the world, Japan, Europe, and America, are dreaming up new forms of artificial life, by which we mean robots and programs which imitate living creatures. These new forms are getting more and more intelligent and are beginning to be more and more like animals and human beings. Just how close will we be able to get to nature? And what are the scientific principles of life on which engineers base their work?
Artificial life literally means life made by human beings rather than by nature. We can create things that we will interact with as if they were alive. The question of whether they are alive or not will depend on us coming up with a much better definition of life. I don't think we can say yet that they're alive or not because we don't really know what the term life means. That's part of this whole exercise, is to try to get a better understanding of what it would mean to be alive.
Engineers seem to be more interested in generating life-like behavior than in recreating life itself. At first glance, being alive seems quite easy to define. It is being part of an environment, fighting for survival, being capable of reproduction. But in fact, there is no scientific definition of life, though behavioral analogies can be made between all living species. All living organisms seem constantly to act purposefully and to have goals that they work towards.
My interest in the study of artificial life right now is to try to understand how we can create artificial organisms that come to have their own purposes rather than the purposes that I've imbued them with. So my primary interest in studying artificial life at the moment is to understand the evolution of purpose.
Scientists researching artificial life often take their inspiration from the theory of evolution, which they use in a simplified form. According to this theory, about 3 billion years ago, chemical combinations of atoms produced the first single-cell life forms, which then came together to form multicellular beings, which then reproduced and diversified. Over hundreds of millions of years, evolution has resulted in increasingly complex and sentient creatures. There are now millions of these species. And here we have man. The human brain is so sophisticated that humans can think, speak, and develop theories about the world around them. This artificial monkey is the first animal robot to have captured a spark of life, and also the first to give us the feeling that evolution has made a new step forward. What makes it so lifelike is its adaptive behavior and the way it learns and evolves. These are what tempt the onlooker to think of it as alive. This robot has an impressive learning capacity. It operates by trial and error, just as living beings do. This robot was created several years ago in the laboratories of Professor Fukuda at Nagoya University in Japan. It moves from one bar to another by swinging like a pendulum. Using its lower limbs to gain momentum, it measures its own weight and calculates precisely the angle at which it needs to move. Only the head is missing. That does not matter, because its artificial brain is situated in an external calculator connected to the robot by a lead. While it is learning, a robot is like a young animal. The learning phase is a crucial moment. All its senses are on the alert. Its brain is unconsciously analyzing a huge amount of information. The first objective is to achieve balance. As soon as a partial solution is found, it is recorded by the brain. The bird gradually works out more and more successful behaviors until it finds the best solution. Man has always observed nature. With increasing frequency, it is in the forms taken by living organisms that engineers are finding blueprints for improving their technology and dealing with the environment. Nature contains many examples of locomotion. In order to build robots which are better adapted to their environment, robotics take direct inspiration from the ways in which animals and humans move. Where does it come from, this need to create an artificial being, a sort of mirror image or double in a metal shell, ready to obey our every command?
As we explore the history of our differing human cultures, we keep finding this rather paradoxical desire to reproduce life by a new means, because we've known how to reproduce life naturally for a long time. Perhaps this desire has always been there, this deep wish to create or recreate a man or a woman artificially by different means.
De recréer un homme ou une femme artificiellement par différents moyens. On sait que la statuaire grecque veut reproduire la vie.
We know that Greek sculpture tried to reproduce life in its smallest movements and details, right down to the blood pulsing beneath the skin of its statues. Witness Pygmalion and Galatea, the story of a young king who decides to sculpt an artificial woman because he isn't satisfied with any of the women he knows, but who is desperate for love and wants to make a woman he'll be able to love. So he shapes her himself out of lifeless matter, the ideal woman he longs for.
Dans la tradition juive, dans la tradition religieuse juive, il y a cette idée du golem, cette idée des hommes qui prient, qui ont capturé d'une certaine façon dans la prière le secret de la vie, et qui vont par leur prière réussir à invoquer un homme artificiel qu'ils vont immédiatement défaire, bien évidemment, mais qui ont capturé. En lisant les textes sacrés, on sait que Dieu a créé la vie à partir de la glaise, qui est un élément fondamental, la glaise, la terre. Et le mythe du golem est un mythe de glaise, un mythe de terre. On va façonner la terre, on va façonner l'image d'un homme dans la terre, et on lui donnera la vie, on lui insufflera la vie. Qu'est-ce qui fait cet élan vital?
Where does this vital spark come from?
Ce qui fait que l'homme bouge, ce qui fait que l'homme se meut, au XXe, c'est l'information. C'est le code, c'est cette grande découverte que fait Turing en 1936, le mathématicien Alan Turing en 1936, et d'autres après, tous ceux qui vont inventer l'informatique, tous ceux qui vont régénérer la biologie dans la génétique et qui voient le monde à travers l'information, qui ont une vision, une véritable vision, selon laquelle le monde c'est de l'information, selon laquelle le monde est organisé autour de l'information.
This vision of the world seems to see nature as organized matter within which information is continually being exchanged. All this information gives organisms their hidden individual characteristics. A growing plant can thus be defined by the vast number of microscopic interactions between its constituent cells, and these are used by biologists to construct computer models. This notion of information has come to dominate the whole of modern biology.
C'est à partir de cette vision du monde en termes d'information qu'on va chercher à reproduire non pas l'ensemble de la vie humaine, mais cet élément qui est peut-être perçu comme le vrai flux vital au XXe siècle, qui est l'intelligence. Les informaticiens vont chercher à reproduire l'intelligence humaine, à en comprendre les secrets, à la transférer dans une machine qui va être en quelque sorte l'équivalent du cerveau humain. Et s'ils le font, c'est bien parce qu'ils pensent que l'intelligence, dans l'intelligence, repose fondamentalement le secret de la vie et du mouvement.
On pense que l'informatique et la modélisation informatique est le biais peut-être le plus naturel pour reproduire le fonctionnement biologique. D'abord parce que la mathématique aujourd'hui prouvait ses faiblesses et que l'informatique dans son aspect simulation, donc faire tourner les programmes, reproduit un peu les mêmes mécanismes qui sont intéressants dans le vivant, c'est-à-dire les aspects comment est-ce que du complexe peut émerger l'interaction simple. L'ordinateur est parfait pour ça, c'est pas difficile de programmer du simple, l'ordinateur a une puissance de calcul telle qu'il peut faire tourner du simple des petites choses, des petits mécanismes simples, peut le faire tourner des milliards de fois, et donc l'ordinateur peut nous montrer comment, de fait, ces deux niveaux d'observation sont possibles. Donc en fait, le biologiste, et pareil aussi pour l'interaction à l'environnement, tout l'aspect mécanistique du vivant trouve dans l'informatique le support naturel. Ça va jusqu'au point où certains disent que l'ordinateur pourrait être un jour un objet vivant. Le premier objet vivant artificiel, ce serait un ordinateur programmé d'une certaine manière.
Computing and genetics, two disciplines born in the 1950s, which depend on comparable systems of codification. In fact, in computing, information is converted into sequences of noughts and ones. They're transmitted to the computer by means of an electric current passing through a series of open and closed contacts. 0 closed, 1 open. In living organisms, everything depends on DNA, a molecule made up of 4 bases, which constitute a kind of program inside each of our cells. These 4 bases, which are called A, C, G, and T, come together and combine to form genes and chromosomes. Ever since life began, the evolution of species has been based on genes contained in each living cell. These genes are different in each individual. They are, as it were, the code that determines the entire form and behavior of a living organism. These genes are passed from one generation to the next, but undergo random mutations which influence the morphology and behavior of the descendants. At the heart of artificial life research, a new way of programming is based on evolution and genetics. Programs called genetic algorithms reproduce themselves and multiply. they diversify and undergo random mutations. In this way, computer scientists introduce a sort of life form into the computer.
Genetic algorithms are the little computer mechanisms which can produce complexity by interchanging, manipulating, and repeating very simple things. And when you look at what goes on in a computer, it's often surprising to see that after 1,000 generations you get a sort of a little animal which turns up completely out of the blue, when nothing led you to presuppose it would. Now there again the biologist may say, that's interesting, it helps us understand the workings of mechanisms inside us that we've come to take for granted, that we know by heart. Now I see them put into action like that, whether they're enacted by a little robot or on a computer screen. I understand better, I see the connection. So these are not models that predict, but models that help us to confirm or rather fix certain biological principles.
Carl Sims, an American computer artist working in Boston, is exploring the way artificial life operates. In this impressive simulation, which hovers on the borderline between art and engineering, he focuses on the evolutionary behavior of imaginary forms. In this ruthless world, everything is based on competition. These strange virtual creatures battle for their prey, a cube. Each creature is gifted with an individual personality, thanks to an artificial nervous system run by genetic algorithms which govern its shape and behavior. Victory will ensure that a creature reproduces and evolves. In this interactive installation in Nagoya in Japan, which demonstrates a sort of marine ecosystem, the spectators can intervene in the program. The viewers design creatures on a screen. On the left side, they draw the profiles, and on the right, the sections. In the water, these drawings become living creatures. Their swimming abilities depend on how they've been designed. To refuel, they eat other creatures. Then they look for partners and produce offspring. Each of their offspring has the genetic characteristics of its parents. The more generations there are, the more the system evolves.
When people come, they usually don't know anything about genetics, but they feel intuitively that it's like life. Or often we hear the comments of people say, oh, that's like in life, like being killed or being predated or being, mating, of course, and making children and evolving, and the parents take care of their child and so on. So people draw parallels, even though that's a very abstract system. And it's just like some jellyfishes or forms. They are not even really living, but still it gives people this idea of it has something to do with life.
Here, the characteristics of species are determined by the players, who can try out their creative talents. Winner is the one whose species triumphs in the war of natural selection.
The aim of the game is to mutate your creatures and achieve certain levels and goals. But what's interesting is that we are using artificial life techniques. So the predators that live in this world are artificially intelligent. They walk around, they look for food, they're doing their own thing. So the experience of this game is very, very rich. It's like being in the real world. The player uses Darwinian evolution to customize the creature that he plays in the game, so that at the end of the game, the player has created a creature which is unique to them. No one else in the whole world has the same creature. And people will start to empathize with the creature. They'll be very, very personal to them. And that kind of customization that Darwinian evolution allows gives a lot of rewards to the play. There's quite a lot of sex in the game, a lot of death, but you know, it's for a market of 16-year-olds to 35-year-olds. What is interesting with A-Life, and I think this is what surprised everyone involved with A-Life, is that how in an experiment which is so simple, such rich complexity can be generated. And with the surprises, there's that sense of the unknown. And I think that in turn makes man look more closely at this world. And maybe we can understand the fundamental mechanics more. And maybe the world isn't such a magical and mysterious place. Maybe it's a very simple place, and we just can't see the simplicity. But I think A-Life does actually change the way you look at the world.
Is it really possible to see an underlying order and simplicity behind the immense diversity of nature and the living world? For those who study artificial life, nature always seems to come up with the same geometrical shapes. We see it in natural forms and organizational structures, as if the whole living world were controlled by the same subtle logic, invisible but real.
When you look at the arrangement of leaves at the tip of, say, a monkey puzzle tree, then what you will see is a sequence, or a sunflower. You'll see a sequence of spirals radiating in different directions, very orderly. There are very precise mathematical relationships that those spirals obey. Now the question is, how do we explain that? This is an intrinsic self-organizing process that is now understood at a certain level. We don't understand all the biological details, but we do understand the fundamental principles of organization that are involved in generating that remarkable degree of order. Physical systems that are poised between two types of order. That is precisely the concept that Chris Langton introduced into the study of artificial life in terms of the concept of edge of chaos. And so too much chaos is bad for you and too much order is bad for you, but just on the edge, in between, that is, if you like, the best place to be in an unpredictable world, because you're ready to respond sensitively to whatever happens. So this is a concept that's completely consonant with ideas that have come out of life emerging at the edge of chaos through these critical transition points.
Life springs from an arrangement of matter. Life is order out of inert matter. Incredibly complex order, perhaps, but order nonetheless.
The edge of chaos is a phrase to identify a particular kind of a dynamical regime of behavior in physical systems that is not completely ordered like a crystal and not totally random like a hot gas. Hot gas is very, very random behavior. Ice is very, very, very regular behavior. Complex behavior, like that found in biology, seems to have some aspects of both. It's partly ordered, but it's not completely ordered, and yet it's not totally random. So it's a mixture of order and disorder, and there are reasons to believe that information can come to play a very, very, very critical role in physical systems in the vicinity of things that are called phase transitions between ordered and disordered dynamics. So my hypothesis is that because life depends fundamentally on information, that life emerged at a transition between ordered and disordered states in the universe.
Artificial life chiefly makes use of computer simulations to reproduce the mechanisms of living things. Here, each dot on the screen is a sort of virtual ant with its own program. When these little virtual machines meet, a sort of pattern gradually emerges, which is complex, unpredictable, and not at all pre-programmed.
The point of this kind of research is to try to understand the capabilities that a collection of simple machines can have that is more than just the simple sum of the capabilities of the individual machines themselves. So when these machines run into the past histories of other machines, they can change their state, change their behavior, do something very different. So their interactions can give rise to classes of computation that none of them can do individually.
Groups structure themselves and evolve via a system of communication based on imitation and obedience to simple rules. In this simulation, the movements of each bird in space are decided by programs which make all the necessary calculations so that the bird moves without disturbing the group. The rules are few and simple. There is no central coordination. Instead, information exchanged with neighboring birds allows coordinated group movement to take place. The behavior of the group as a whole seems coherent, as if it were directed by a sort of intelligence, even though there is no leader. This is known as collective intelligence. We are surrounded by systems like this. The individuals in a collective system like the stock exchange are the agents of the general movements they are part of, but by no means control. Boxy, who was created by Miyazawa in Japan, is a light-seeking robot whose movements are controlled by an integrated circuit linked to a very simple clock mechanism. A single small robot is not capable of performing complicated tasks. These robots operate like separate neurons within the brain. Each one does part of the work. If one robot breaks down, it is immediately replaced by another. Modern robotics uses the principle of collective intelligence and is moving towards multiple robot construction in which individuals communicate in order to perform complex tasks together. The first robot football competition in the world took place in 1997 in Nagoya, Japan. This was not just a game, but a very good way of evaluating the robot's capacities, and the best robotics scientists in the world took part. The robots learned the basic rules of football and were then completely independent.
It's very difficult. Okay, if you come to Nagoya with the expectation that you see the exciting World Cup level competition, you'll be very disappointed. For this year, the purpose is to realize how difficult it is, how difficult the load, how long we have to go. And if we have a team which can reasonably play kind of pseudo soccer, they're chasing the ball and put the ball into the goal once in a while, and that would be a great success for this year. Playing soccer game needs a lot of intelligence. And if you compare with the chess, I would say it's a different aspect for intelligence. The chess, you have to wait and spend time to think. That's one form of intelligence. But the other form of intelligence, you have to react very quickly. You have to change plan, recalculate the plan every minute or every second. And that's the other aspect, this aspect which is very important in daily life. What we're doing in daily life, you go on stairways and you're going to trying to get a taxi and look around, cross the road. That is the real-time aspect of the intelligence, as opposed to the chess kind of intelligence.
Early days of applying computers to problems in the world, the pioneers of computers, John von Neumann, Stan Ulam, Alan Turing, and other people of that general era, the late 40s and the early 50s, saw what computers could really be used for. And basically it was to try to understand biology. And at that point, they didn't make a big distinction between life and intelligence. For me, artificial intelligence really will only be able to be understood when we understand how does an insect colony organize all of its insects so that it can do very, very complicated things in the world. How does it think about its world and generate behaviors? I think that since in evolutionary time, intelligence emerged out at the very, very end of biological evolution, I think that we are going to have to understand the earlier stages of behavior generation to discover things that must have been the roots of human intelligence that we will not understand if we just go directly for human intelligence itself. I think that we have to understand how intelligence could have emerged, what aspects of biological phenomena gave rise to this explosion of the capability of intelligence. So for me, artificial life is the path that we're going to have to take to understand artificial intelligence.
40 years ago, the first robot makers thought that by the year 2000, machines would be intelligent, that they would think. At that time, priority was given to abstract intelligence and reasoning. This goal has been partially achieved since then. In 1997, a computer beat the world chess champion Garry Kasparov. But we now know that it's easier to simulate the mental processes of a chess player or a Go player than it is to reproduce what goes on inside the brain when a gesture or a movement through space is made. This is because, in order to interact with the real world, the brain has to cope simultaneously with a large amount of data and perceptions. Artificial life research is now trying to build machines capable of perceiving their environment physically and of using the information.
Dans le milieu des ingénieurs, des mathématiciens, il y a
In the field of
deux grandes
mathematics and
attitudes dans
engineering,
les
there
années
are two
40, dans les
main
années 50 et
attitudes
encore
current during
aujourd'hui.
the 40s
Ce
and
sont des
50s,
attitudes
which are still
d'ailleurs
current
probablement
nowadays.
très
In fact,
anciennes,
they're
ancrées
probably very ancient,
dans des
deep-rooted
registres, dans
ways
des
of
modèles
thinking which
culturels très
correspond to
anciens.
very old cultural models.
Deux attitudes, une
Of these
attitude
two
qu'on pourrait
attitudes, one
qualifier
might
de
be called
spiritualiste.
spiritualist.
On va
From
chercher
this point of view,
le secret
you
de la
look for the
vie, le
secret
secret
of
du
life
corps, le
and the
code,
body.
on va
You unravel
l'écrire.
and write out the
On ne va
code
pas
without
s'interroger,
questioning what
s'intéresser
you're
au
doing
support
or looking
matériel.
at matter.
On va chercher
In
le
a way,
code
you
dans
look
ce
for
qu'il a
the
de
code
plus
in its
pur, de plus
purest, most
spirituel, de
spiritual,
plus
ethereal
éthéré,
form.
d'une certaine
That's the
façon.
first attitude.
Ça, c'est la première
Then there's
attitude.
the second,
Puis il y a une
which
deuxième
consists in
attitude qui
laying hold of
consiste à
matter, getting back to matter.
toucher la matière,
It
revenir à la
asks,
matière.
why try to
Pourquoi
understand the
comprendre
secret
le
of
secret de la
life
vie et de
and
l'intelligence
intelligence if you're not
si
going
ce
to
n'est pas
build
pour construire
objects,
des objets,
living objects,
des
which will
objets
give
vivants
form to these
qui vont les
discoveries
incarner, qui
and
seront
which
là
will be there
devant
in
nous,
front of us,
qui seront là
sort of
avec
with
nous
us.
d'une certaine façon.
手を出しますとお手をしてくれます。あと同じように伏せっていうのもできます。
Getting back to matter is getting back to the body. This is the role of roboticists today, to produce an autonomous creature that can respond to the stimuli of its environment. These little dogs made by the Sony researchers in Tokyo are toys designed to replace pets. But for the moment, they're not fully able to do so. To produce a truly autonomous, adaptive creature, scientists need to understand the mechanisms of bodily intelligence. They will then be able to create an artificial organism comprising different means of interacting with the world. It will be made up of specialized modules, each of which performs the calculations necessary to accomplish its own task. All over the world, teams of scientists are trying to reproduce the physical actions of parts of the body. In Tsukuba, in Japan, scientists are developing a visual system that can follow an object and identify a person or a thing. This robot, created by Professor Kuniyoshi, is able to adjust its angle of vision and focus on a detail which it then analyzes.
We plan to implement that Escher, the vision system, onto our humanoid system. The humanoid system is a human-like robot with the head, the arms, the torso, legs, and everything. Why the human-like shape? We could go for arbitrary shapes like octopuses or any other shapes, but we chose human-like structure because we believe the intelligence or meaning of interactions emerges from interaction between human and human-like robots.
Here is the most ambitious humanoid robot, COG, short for cognitive. The hope is that one day COG will look like a human being and have the same dexterity. The COG project in Boston was started by Rodney Brooks, who revitalized robotics by underlining the crucial importance of perception and interaction with humans. He believes that COG's intelligence will emerge naturally from his contacts with the outside world, making particular use of a sophisticated visual system.
Just like in your eyes, you're able to see things without much detail off in the distance. If you see a ball coming in, you rapidly move your eyes over to see what's there, and then with your fovea track where it is and go out and catch it.
COG's hearing, linked to his neck, is guided by a different program. His head turns towards the source of the noise. cooperation between different modules is what really allows COG to learn.
That is how the brain is organized. That is this very distributed system. There's lots of little pieces, that all evolved over time separately and are all running separately, and they don't even know about the other pieces that are going on there. They're doing their stuff, sending messages off to muscles or to the cerebellum and demanding things that happen, and maybe those things happen, maybe they don't, because maybe some other part of the brain gets control at that particular time. Right now, it doesn't know how to move its arm. It moves its arm out towards what it saw, then sees where its arm ended up and sees that it's wrong, and so it learns that it should move it slightly differently. And slowly over time, it's going to get better and better at reaching towards the thing that it's seen. Babies take a few months to do this well. COG takes a few hours to do not quite as well as babies. I have a fantasy of being able to build a human-level equivalent robot which is able to operate in the world in the way we operate. And maybe even better than we can eventually.
Les machines qu'on essaye de construire doivent interagir dans un monde qui change, qu'on ne connaît pas a priori. Et là, a priori, ce monde qui change, c'est en fait le monde de la vie de tous les jours. C'est la nature, c'est dans la nature, c'est avec des humains aussi. Donc c'est le monde dans lequel on voudrait que ces machines puissent travailler. Et d'autre part, la technique qu'on utilise à l'intérieur maintenant, les systèmes de contrôle qu'on utilise à l'intérieur de certaines machines, mais sont constitués d'un grand nombre d'entités. Et ces grands nombres d'entités qui travaillent ensemble, on ne sait pas les contrôler, on n'a pas de modèle mathématique. Les modèles mathématiques sont très limités pour pouvoir les contrôler. Et certainement, quand ce modèle doit être en interaction avec le monde vivant. Donc à ce moment-là, on doit aussi s'inspirer de la biologie pour se demander mais comment est-ce que la biologie est parvenue à coordonner tous ces processus qui travaillent ensemble. Comment muter les individus à l'intérieur des robots, comment les transformer pour pouvoir faire la tâche qu'on lui demande, c'est-à-dire pouvoir se déplacer comme ça dans l'environnement et suivre la balle. On a un grand nombre de surprises lorsque on laisse évoluer les systèmes. Lorsqu'on laisse le robot évoluer, il trouve parfois des fautes. J'appelle ça une faute parce que l'ingénieur voulait qu'il ne fasse pas ce genre de éviter deux obstacles et puis, par exemple, être bloqué quelque part. Eh bien, il y avait une faute quelque part parce que l'un des senseurs avait une réaction différente. Eh bien, quand on laisse tourner, on utilise tout d'un coup, il parvient, juste une petite erreur, il parvient à l'exploiter. Parfois pour faire la tâche alors qu'on n'avait jamais pensé qu'on pouvait le faire réaliser comme ça. Parfois aussi dans le sens négatif, le système ne sait plus bouger ou reste bloqué. Donc c'est cette espèce de création qui est une surprise, qui va tout à fait dans un sens différent de l'esprit de on part d'un problème, on le décompose en sous-problème. Il n'y a pas beaucoup de surprises. Mais ici, par ces algorithmes, justement, il y a une surprise, une espèce de création. Est-ce qu'on pourrait dire que c'est relié à une espèce de vie? Peut-être, je ne sais pas. Personnellement, je pense bien.
Mark Tilden is a scientist working in the Los Alamos Military Research Center in New Mexico, USA. He's been interested in robots since the age of 6.
My robots work because I use a new control technology called nervous net technology. It doesn't use computers, and it is based upon the assumption that a nervous system without a brain can run a robot more efficiently than a brain which is trying to control a body. My devices are built from various different scraps and bits of electronics, including various forms of motors which I take from dead disk drives and dead computers, laptops, VCRs, basically the leftover technology of modern society. The advantage with things like this is that they can be made adaptive and very capable. And we've built everything from snake bots to walking robots, which are built entirely out of Walkman. From as small as you want to as large as you want, but all of these things without a single line of computer programming required. This is real life, artificial life. And for years I have fought against the notion against computer artificial life because it is only valid inside the computer. Now, there's also been other things, because I've seen many of my colleagues do something, an amazing simulation on a computer, and then they try and make it in real life, and it just does not work. And that has happened time and time and time again. And the reason is that inside a computer, the world is very, very regular. And they try and make little artificial life forms that try and push towards chaos, push towards interesting behavior. In real life, the world is very complex and chaotic, and we try and push towards regularity. So computer artificial life pushes towards complexity, whereas real life pushes towards regularity. We live because we actually have an internal model. It was very difficult for us without computers to make devices that did not have internal models, but now we are pushing that. And the exciting thing is that these are not world models that we create, these are world models that happen inside of our machines. And they happen with the smallest number of components. No computers, no programming, no massive memory. These devices are getting an essence of self in 20 transistors. In other words, what it would take to build a reasonable radio, we can now make something that can measure and take a sample and a decision on its world. If that's not a definition of life, I don't know what is.
None of these artificial life forms reaches anything like the complexity of living creatures. The essence of life is still out of our grasp, and will be, so it seems, for a long time. But artificial life provokes the question, where are we going with these new life forms? We went to a number of laboratories to interview scientists and artists, and we asked them what they thought the future held.
We really are at the stage where there's reasonable hope that we will be creating, in fact we are now creating for the first time, self-reproducing molecular systems. We don't know what it means to do this though. We are so used to constructing things by design that we don't even have the remotest notion of what it would mean to have a technology that is evolvable, not constructible, but evolvable to achieve what we want. Yet I suspect that in the next 40 years we're going to learn how to do that. And it's going to be just a wonderful transformation. It's going to be fascinating.
Our aim now is to create a computer which will have a conscience of itself and emotions. It is what we are currently trying to achieve.
I can see A-Life being used much more for design applications. So in effect you could breed cars, you could breed buildings, but the result will be that designers and artists and architects will be put out of work. That is the logical conclusion.
I think technology is far too arrogant. A lot of people think, oh my God, the machine's taking control. There's always the plug. If you get tired of it, you just pull the plug. Now, some people will say the plug's not always that accessible. Maybe one day we can't pull the plug anymore. Maybe one day the computer system is so spread throughout our society that it is no longer, the plug's no longer there. We can't pull it anymore.
I lie awake at night. I am very worried about this problem, and I'm part of it. You know, I'm pioneering this creation of artificial brains that I know next century will just become the dominant industry. I mean, computers today, we have a new kind of economy with the internet, the web, and so on. We have increasingly an information-based economy. And that's just the beginning. Later, it will be a artificial brain-based economy, because these machines will just be everywhere. And they'll be at molecular scale, tiny and very, very powerful. So they will just dominate our lives.
Bon, pour des robots intelligents et tout ça, il y a dans la science fiction toutes sortes de choses, mais bon, moi j'ai pas du tout peur de tout ça parce que c'est vraiment peut-être fin de la prochaine siècle ou même après. Il y a tellement de problèmes qui sont pas résolus. On est là, il faut aller là. Alors on comprend presque rien du fonctionnement du cerveau.
これからのフェーズっていうのは本当に人々がですね、もう誰でも使えるようなコンピューター、友達のように仲間のように使えるようなコンピューター、そういう時代にしていかなければならないというふうに我々は思っています。
Quand je parle de ce domaine de la vie artificielle,
people around me, my friends and family seem completely, a bit, well, somehow it seems dangerous to them.
D'un aspect ça semble dangereux, tout ce qui se passe. On va manipuler ce qui se passe autour de nous. On va avoir des machines qui vont créer maintenant, qui vont réagir. On ne saura peut-être même pas comment ils vont réagir. Et aussi d'autre part, ça semble tellement loin. Je crois qu'il faut comprendre la vie artificielle comme quelque chose qui vient avec les nouvelles technologies.
Not something like E.T., which will appear in our
qui va
homes
nous
all of a
apparaître
sudden.
d'un coup dans notre maison. Et ce sera simplement permettra d'avoir des outils qui sont plus efficaces.
You won't see artificial life.
Vous ne verrez pas la vie artificielle. Ce sera caché.
Il y a dans la réflexion des
In the
premiers
thinking of the
informaticiens
first computer
une question
scientists,
sur
there is a question
l'immortalité.
about immortality,
Un
the
constat de la
realization that the body is
mortalité du
mortal
corps
and
et de
bodily
la vie
life
du
comes to
corps.
an end.
Et un
And a
désir
desire
de
to find in
trouver
intelligence
dans
and the code which
l'intelligence, dans le
governs it,
code
a
qui
kind of
anime
immortality. That is life, a sort of
l'immortalité,
eternal
c'est-à-dire
life.
la vie éternelle d'une certaine façon.
There's a famous science fiction story in which somebody replaces a person's neurons one by one with artificial neurons that are made out of something else. And so they haven't created an artificial brain, they've slowly transferred the material of a brain from carbon chain stuff to silicon-based stuff, but it's the same brain all the way through. I think that again, for me, it's not the material that matters, it's how the material is organized and the basic functional roles that the bits and pieces are carrying out. And so whether it's all silicon or all carbon or a mixture of the two, I think that we are going to be able to create things that for all intents and purposes are alive. It's going to remain a tough philosophical question of whether we call them alive or not. It's going to be pushing on our definition of life.